Project Cool Expert Speaker Series, Coaching Insights with Niel Albero, the UDL Guidelines.
Hello, my name is Niel Albero, and I'm an Implementation Specialist at CAST. As we get ready to coach teachers with Universal Design for Learning, there are always things that bubble up to the forefront in schools, whether it be a new curriculum to implement, new structures in our professional learning communities, or other initiatives that we can use the framework of Universal Design for Learning to support. The UDL Guidelines offers coaches considerations to support teachers in meeting the needs of all learners. As a coach, I'll share some insights throughout the guidelines that represent the work I've done in schools across the country. So dig in and let's get started.
Image of the UDL Guidelines graphic with principles, guidelines, and considerations.
We'll start with engagement. As we coach instruction, schools are looking for increasing opportunities to make learning more student-centered. Take a look at the considerations under engagement and choose some areas that might support your teachers in this effort. Here's some places that I get started when I'm working with schools. First, we have to support teachers to optimize the relevance of the curriculum. New curriculum is not always built for our setting to represent our students and connect to their interests and identities. So I support teachers to identify where this relevance could be a barrier and increase the options that help students to find their own relevance in the learning. Relevance is key because it supports students to connect and become engaged, supports them to retain information, and sustain effort in the face of challenge. It will also help them transfer new knowledge and skills beyond that classroom setting. Next, as a coach, you encourage teachers to set and reflect on personal goals for their instruction. We want to encourage this same approach when teachers are working with students. We know that presenting the lesson goal is important for students' understanding of what they're learning. But when we coach teachers to take the lesson goal and have students personalize it or set their own goals, then we center students in the learning process. That is the start of learner agency. If students can set their own goals, make choices related to their goals, and reflect on their progress, we honor their agency as learners. Relevance builds the access to engaging with the contents, and goal setting supports students' agency to make purposeful learning choices. Finally, in engagement, John Dewey says, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. As coaches, we encourage teachers to reflect on their practice, what's working and not working. We help them and support them to sustain certain practices and shift others. We have to encourage the same process of student self-reflection and assessment in the classroom. Oftentimes, this comes too late in the learning process to be useful for teachers, but more importantly for students. Encourage teachers to reflect with students before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. Reflection before the lesson may sound like, what do you know about this topic? But it also may sound like, what has been successful for you in the past when doing this type of work? This helps to build on the collective strengths of our students. We should likewise do that same in coaching strategic teams. Identify what has helped them in the past to try new things or adopt new initiatives, then recreate those systems. We also have to ask, what's been a barrier to new learning in the past? Plan to address those barriers as you design systems of support together. Then take the opportunity to reflect during learning. This might sound like, what excites you about this work? And what new connections are you making? It may also sound like, how is the system that we designed together working for all of us? What changes should we make to how the materials are provided or how we are working together that would better help us to achieve our goals? This reflection is important for both students in the classroom and teacher teams we're working with. We remember that there is no judgment. When someone wants a shift, they are likely responding to a new barrier that we didn't anticipate. This is learners using their agency to find alternate pathways to learning. Finally, at the end of learning, self-assessment can sound like, how did I do in this learning? Did I reach my goals? But equally as important is, did my learning choices work for me? What would I do next time as a learner? Some quick reflections on the engagement principle. Start with, Optimize relevance of the learning so learners become invested. Then move on to have learners set personal goals so we center them in the learning process. And then finally, stop throughout learning so that learners can self-assess and reflect to acknowledge the learning they've done and identify what works in their learning process and what they want to change. And remember, this goes for students in our classes and the teachers we work with as coaches. The next principle in the UDL guidelines is design multiple means of representation. As a coach, this set of guidelines shifts my gaze as I walk through a classroom, as well as when I'm coaching teachers. I start to look at the accessibilities of the materials and the content so that we can get students to deep understanding. We are bringing so many different materials from so many sources, whether it be open source over the internet or box curriculums. We have to design our instruction for these materials to be accessible to all learners. So we ask, what are the steps we are taking to make sure this content is fully accessible for all students? Materials can create a barrier in decoding, language, and comprehension, which we have the power with the use of technology and in-class strategies to minimize for students. Every time we walk into a lesson, we can monitor the materials that students are using to identify what is working and where barriers arise. As coaches, once we go through the steps of helping teachers to make materials accessible, we can build students' agency by supporting them to use different tools and resources. As I coach a teacher through the lesson, I outline all the scaffolds and supports that are available to students at every step of the lesson so that they can turn to those resources in their stuck moments. I rehearse the lesson to consider barriers that students may experience and the support we can give them to build independence in using the tools, resources, and scaffolds that are around them. Part of learner agency is being resourceful, and as a coach, I support teachers to be resourceful in trying new strategies, as well as coaching their students to be resourceful in their stuck moments. And finally, we're building big ideas and themes and connections for students. This is so important for students to be able to connect to their learning and connect their learning inside and outside of the classroom, but also be able to see that these connections help us to build a deeper understanding in the classroom. One of my favorite strategies as a former math teacher was to have a bulletin board listing all the units that we were going to study for the year. During each unit, we would put up some artifacts from the unit, like the key questions or problems that students had done. Students would make big ideas and conjectures throughout the learning. I would put those on quote bubbles and hang them on the wall. We incorporated visuals and models, and we incorporated the problems that we really connected to. This helped students to connect their math learning throughout the year. They were able to reference their learning progression. They would make connections from one unit to another and see how their skills built across each situation. As a coach, what big ideas and themes are you striving for? You can see mine are access and agency. How do you build big ideas with students? How are they visual and interacted with? These are valuable prompts for us to support deeper understanding for students and for teachers. So let's reflect on the representation principle. 1, review all materials to make sure they're accessible to all students. 2, identify the tools and resources that support student independence throughout learning. And 3, identify those big ideas and themes you're connecting to and make them usable during the learning. The third principle of universal design for learning is to design multiple means of action expression. The first thing I support in my coaching is for teachers to design an accessible physical and digital environment. So many of our resources and activities are digital now. How are we supporting teachers to provide a digital environment that students can easily navigate? When we think about that digital environment, we want students to have a consistent experience in whatever classroom they walk into within our district. So we provide and teach how to use some simple accessibility features within our digital platforms. As a coach, every teacher I work with has different ways of sharing and expressing their learning. These individual differences is what makes the classroom atmosphere special. We want to encourage these modes of expression so teachers can in turn plan for their students' various forms of expression as well. We want to support the multiple ways our students can demonstrate understanding. This becomes so important because students are likely to be more engaged in the artifacts that they create. If those artifacts can be embedded in real-world situations, have authentic audiences that they can share them with, the students are more likely to persevere throughout learning. It also gives us a better sense of what students really know and are able to do in relation to the goals. If we embed only one way for students to demonstrate understanding, that's going to work for some and not for others. So when I want the most accurate assessment of what students know and are able to do, I'll design different modes of expression. Finally, in my coaching, one prompt that always seems to resonate is, how can my students monitor their own progress? This can be an evolution for students across the year as they build independence in learning. At the beginning of the year, I might start providing a checklist and then move to students creating their own checklist so they can learn to break down larger assignments into smaller, manageable chunks. I might start the year by providing a rubric and having students self-assess on the rubric, and gradually move to co-designing the rubric with my students so they have a say in what is valued in the project. I always want the teachers I coach and the students that I work with to be able to answer to themselves, how am I reaching the goals? The tools like rubrics and checklists and the procedures that incorporate feedback and self-reflection combine to create a system that supports ongoing learning. So a few reflections with the action expression principle. Number one, make sure the physical and digital environment is easily navigable. Number two, design multiple ways for learners to demonstrate understanding. And number three, build planning and strategy skills throughout the year. So your key takeaways for the guidelines video is for you to do some reflection. Use this information to reflect on your own practice. Where do you spend most of your time coaching? Where do you want to help your teachers focus their attention? What would help to remove barriers for students to more fully provide them access and develop their agency as learners?
To learn more about Project Cool, please visit bit.ly/COOL-coaching. CAST, until learning has no limits. This content was produced under the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, grant number H326M200040. Jennifer Coffey serves as the project officer. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned in this content is intended or should be inferred. This product is public domain.